Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome back to Learn to Read Quran. So today we're moving on from last time where we did the shadda, and in this time's lesson we are going to look at how we stretch vowels. Yes, you can stretch a vowel. So we know that there are three vowels in the Arabic alphabet. We have the fatha, which is the a noise. We have the kasra, which is the e noise, and we have the damma, which is the u noise. And so far, we've kept these length of the vowel noise reasonably short, but we can actually stretch them. And so today we're looking at how you elongate or how you make a long vowel from the fatha. So here we have on line 1, we have a meme with a fatha. Now, I know you all know that a meme with a fatha is ma, but if you notice after it, there is an alif, and this is the rule. So if you have a pen handy or a pencil, just make a note on your booklet that when you have a letter with a fatha followed by an alif, then you get to stretch the vowel. And this is how it works. So this ma noise becomes ma. You can hear I've elongated the a noise to make it a 2-count stretch. It's a 2-count stretch. Just like we had a 2-count hold for the ghunna, this is a 2-count hold, sorry, this is a 2-count stretch for the fatha. And it's these stretches and these holds of this rhythmical nature that give the recitation of the Quran that beautiful rhythmical melody when you're reciting. So let's carry on. We've got a kaf with a fatha and an alif. So this is not just ka, this becomes ka, na. So you can hear the difference between a 2-count stretch on the kaf, which is ka, and then no stretch and just one fatha noise on the noon, na. So this is the challenge, making sure you keep the short vowels short and the elongated, the lengthened vowels to their proper 2-count stretch. So ka, na. Let's carry on. E, because it was just a hamza with a kasra, so that's a short noise. Then the dhal has the fatha with the alif, so that's our 2-count stretch. So that's E, the. Now this, I think we've seen before, the lam alif, this is a lam. There's the fatha on it. And this here is the alif. So you have a lam with a fatha followed by an alif. So a fatha followed by an alif. This gives you a 2-count stretch. La. Let's carry on. I'm sure you're getting the hang of it. Dal, fatha, alif. This is my 2-count stretch. Da, ra. Because the ra has just got a fatha, so that's not being stretched. Qaf with a fatha and an alif, that's my 2-count stretch. Qa, la. And you'll notice that the 2-count stretch on the qaf, because the qaf is thick and heavy, the whole of the 2-count stretch sounds thick and heavy because the back of my tongue stays thickened up, stays elevated at the back of my mouth for the whole of that 2-count stretch. So that's why I have qa, la. Let's carry on. A, fa. Now here we have a lam with the fatha, and here is the alif that's following it. So it's a 2-count stretch here. So we've got a, fa, la. Then a, ra, da. So hopefully by now you've noticed that the ra had a fatha followed by an alif. So that was the 2-count stretch. And the whole of that 2-count stretch, because the ra is thick and heavy when it has a fatha on top of it, the whole of that 2-count stretch is thick and heavy. A, ra, da. Let's carry on. Line 3, fa. Now here we have the hamza with the fatha, And following it is an alif, so this is the 2-count stretch. Fa, ti, because the kasra on the ta is just a short kasra noise. Then I have a, the 2-count stretch was here, ben. So this is an interesting one. Let's take a little bit of time on this just to point something out. When you have a letter with a fatha followed by an alif, we now know that this becomes a 2-count stretch on that fatha. So this has become a, the. Now the ba has 2 fathas. Don't get confused, because remember way back when we did the tanween of fatha, and if you can't remember, flick back to that page, listen back to that video. When we have the tanween of fatha, we pronounce 2 fathas as an n noise, and the alif that sits after it, we can imagine it's not there. We're not going to pay any attention to it as far as pronunciation goes. And we said at the time that if you have the burning question of, well, why is that alif there then, if we're not going to pronounce it, then wait until we get towards the end of this course and you will find out. So we have a, the, ben. Let's carry on. We have a, sa, because the alif with the fatha on that scene gives us the 2-count stretch. We, ro. So the whole of that is a, sa, we, ro. And here on the end of the line we have a, dhaqa, na. So there's a little bit more going on in this word, isn't there? You have to remember everything that you've done so far. You can't just look at the one lesson and think, okay, I don't need to remember anything else. You need to remember everything from those lessons before. We're building each time, each lesson, we're building on our knowledge, and we can't pull any of those building blocks of knowledge away, otherwise the whole thing comes crumbling down. So you must remember what you've learned so far. So what have we learned? We've learned that when we have a letter with a sukoon, we join up from the letter before. So that's why I joined up from the dal to the qaf. But also, when we talked about sukoon, we talked about certain letters. Remember, they were in blue. Those 5 letters that when they have a sukoon on them, you need to bounce back the noise. And that was qaf, ba, ba, jim, and dal. And here we have a qaf, so that's why I had the bounce back. So we had a, dhaqa, you heard the bounce back, na. So this is a noon with a fatha and alif. That's where the 2-count stretch was. Okay, let's keep going on. Line 4, we have a ta with a fatha and an alif. So it's going to be a 2-count stretch, and ta is a thick, heavy letter. So the whole of that 2-count stretch will be thick and heavy. Ta. You can hear the ah noise in that. Ta. And I make that ah noise, that is the thick, heavy noise that goes with any of these thick, heavy letters, because the back of my tongue has thickened up. It's elevated. It's a muscle. A tongue is a muscle. You can bunch it, just like, people want to show you their biceps and they bunch up their biceps. You can bunch up the back of your tongue because it is purely just muscle. And this is how you get that thickened noise. Or, ta. So even the qaf following it, that just had the short fatha noise, was also thick and heavy. Let's carry on. Here we have our 2-count stretch at the beginning. We have the hamza with the fatha and the alif. So that's the 2-count stretch. Ya, tay, ni. So the ta joined to the ya because the ya had the sukoon. Then I have wa, zi, ro, tun. Here was our 2-count stretch. The wow had the fatha with the alif, so that's where our 2-count stretch was. Then we have a va with a fatha and an alif, so the 2-count stretch on the va is thick and heavy. Va, li, ma, tun. Let's carry on. Now this line, I'm not going to point out where the 2 count stretches are. Hopefully you'll hear them. I've explained it for 4 lines now. I'm sure you've got it. I'm sure you're sick of me explaining it. I'm sure you've got it so well that you can do it yourself now. So here we've got غالب بآية قصمنا خلقنا. Okay, so on these first 5 lines, we've seen that when we've had a letter with a fatha followed by an alif, we have had a 2 count stretch of the fatha. So the a noise went from a to a. It got lengthened to a 2 count stretch noise. Now this alif can present itself in a different way as well. It can actually, and here we see this on line 6, it can actually be a little tiny hanging alif that gets carried on the letter ya. So this is how this will work. We have ka, fa. So you heard that I did a 2 count stretch on the fa because the fa has a fatha and it's followed by an alif, so that's where the 2 count stretch is, and the ya that's sat underneath is literally just like a little cushion that doesn't take part in the pronunciation at all. So this is ka, fa. So you have to get used to this because a little hanging alif can present itself sometimes with a ya underneath it as a cushion. Poor little ya, getting pushed around, isn't it? Acting like a cushion. It doesn't take part in the pronunciation at all. So then we'll move on. We have sa, a. And how did I get that? Well, I had an ayn with a fatha and a hanging alif. Even though that little tiny hanging alif is tiny, you still get a 2 count stretch, whether the alif is a small one or whether the alif is a long, tall, standing alif, you still get the same 2 count stretch. And the ya underneath it, again, that's just the cushion and it doesn't take part in the pronunciation. So the whole of this word was sa, a. And here we have a, la, because this is lam with a fatha and a little alif, so that's where your 2 count stretch was. And the ya underneath is just a cushion and doesn't take part in the pronunciation at all. And then you could ask, well, why is it there? Well, that's another story. Then you have to start learning Arabic and Arabic grammar and the morphology of the words. But that's not really our lesson today, is it? We are learning how to read. So we have a, la. Then here on the end of this line, we have a hamza with a damma joining to a ha, which is thick and heavy. Ukh, ra. The ra had the fatha, little hanging alif. That's where the 2 count stretch was. And the ya underneath it is the cushion, doesn't take part in the pronunciation. So the whole of this line, the whole of line 6 here, is just about recognizing that sometimes the 2 count stretch is there because a letter has a fatha followed by a little tiny hanging alif, and underneath that alif is a ya cushion that doesn't take part in the pronunciation, but you still get this 2 count stretch because of the hanging alif. So here on line 7 we see more of the hanging alif. Sometimes it has the ya underneath it, sometimes it doesn't bother. It feels like it's strong enough to levitate by itself. So both ways, all you're doing is you're noticing the little hanging alif and seeing that when it comes after a letter with a fatha, you get a 2 count stretch. So let's read line 7. I, la, han. So the lam had the fatha with the alif, that gave you the 2 count stretch. The 2 fathas are just an n noise on the ha, so han. And we know this alif doesn't take part in the pronunciation. How easy is Arabic? You get to miss so many things out, things that don't get taken into the pronunciation. So let's move on. We've got w, o, do. This is the dod with its feta, the hanging alif that gave you the 2-count stretch, and the ya doesn't take part in the pronunciation. That's just your cushion to hold up the little hanging alif. Then we have da, ro, ja, tun. And at the end of the line here we have I, la. The lam had the fatha with the little hanging alif. And again, the ya doesn't take part in the pronunciation. We're just looking at the 2-count stretch that is afforded to us by the alif that comes after the fatha. So let's just read the last line and then we're done. We have aba. So that's a revision of letters with sukoon that take the bounce. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to the sukoon page. Aba, saw, him. And remember the ra with the kasra is light. Ru, la, mun, with the 2 dammas giving us an un noise. The, li, ka. Then the last word on the line, ya. The ya had the fatha with the alif. Way, la, na. So in this word, this last word, we actually have two places where there's a 2-count stretch. The first one is because of a hanging alif, and the second one is because of a long-standing alif. But in both cases, you still get the same length of 2-count stretch. It's not like the stretch with the hanging alif is somehow shorter because of the smaller alif. No, you still get the same length of 2-count stretch for both whether it's a hanging alif or it's a long-standing alif. So excellent. Well done, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed that class. Go over it a few times if you need to. Keep on practicing. That definitely is the name of the game. That's the way you're going to be successful. And inshallah, I'll see you all again next time. Assalamu alaikum.